to the cloud. Okay, let's jump in here. Kind of, I guess we're calling it part 3 of the exercise in pain course review, and just going through a PowerPoint presentation. This entire PowerPoint presentation uninterrupted is available on the MedFit Network website, but it won't have all the great commentary that we're producing as we walk through it. So a quick review, right? We were looking at the logic of, muscle system tension and motor control and somatic sensation, and using exercise to improve control quality and ultimately, hopefully, somatic sensation in a positive direction. And then we looked at the definition of exercise that we're working with about stimulus through a neuromotor system and trying to do something specific to change the state of the system. In this case, generally speaking, we're trying to change the information via changing and improving motor control quality. And why quality, right? Why aren't we talking about quantity? And so again, looking at the qualitativeness of our process, which I think is often overlooked in scientific inquiry, not to take anything away from quantification, it's critically important. But when it comes to the human condition and trying to understand the overall human experience, that is a qualitative thing, can't be quantified. And so why quality? Because, we're looking at the peculiar essential character of a particular aspect of the system, right? We're looking at the property of the system, which is, how it produces motor output. And another definition of quality or qualitativeness is pragmatic, right? It's talking about something being non-inferior, superior of something else, something better or worse, or not so good. Fitness for purpose, I like that definition. What's the purpose of our neuromuscular system and our joint system and our skeletal system and our cardiovascular system and our pulmonary? What's the purpose of all this? It's to move about and hold positions in our environment under conditions. That's the purpose of it. Can we produce it correctly? Service with performance. So, that's where we're coming from qualitatively. How do we come to understand biomotor or muscle control quality? By assessing movement or position maintenance and the things that affect that. And that's, again, fundamental when we look at the way we build models of the sample data sets that we're producing. It starts to give us some insight into, the state of bilateral symmetry or the lack thereof, and where there might be some force output control output issues with the SARs and the QMAMCs, and all this being done in the context of a fundamental objective, and allostatic load, and how much pre-stress is on the system. And so, what's the essential character, feature, service, performance of the biomotor system? Again, we just can't escape this idea of production and control of muscle tension to produce torque in order to control synovial joint action. I mean, this is what it's trying to do. And so, in accordance with our deductive logic, how do we come to understand this idea of control? It's by locating lower quality motor outputs. We got to find them. And that's why we sample and do what we do, is to see if we can locate these areas. And of course, this is reinforced by the literature. Davids, Bennett, and Newell, very well-known neuroscientists, and in their book, Movement System Variability, is highly recommended. Finally, the best way to test the stability of a system is to perturb it. And in modern control theory, from just a straight engineering systems approach, stability deals with time, TO, the state is perturbed from its equilibrium point, XE. Does the state return to its equilibrium point or remain close to its equilibrium point or diverge from it? And so this is where we start to make the connection of stability and quality and control, to continue to build this argument, right? And this idea of equilibrium of a body, in this case, the human body, is stable. If everything acting on it causes deviations from its equilibrium positions to be decreased, and if equilibrium is unstable and forces and moments increase small deviations, it's indifferent if the body remains in equilibrium, deviating on either side from the position of so equilibrium is critical. It's also critical concept in thermodynamics and energy systems. And so stability can't be judged just by looking at something statically in position. It has to be evaluated from how it deviates when perturbed before we can draw conclusions about how stable a system is. So we're building the argument that my biomotor control quality is the function of system stability. This is the value of the QMAMC, and anything you do to perturb a system state to start to get a sense of quality. And speaking to what I think Dom had brought up with what's happening now with the pandemic and this incredible outpouring of remote-based personal training and exercise programming, and what do you do and how do you find control issues and assess the body's capability remotely without the QMAMC. You can't in an easy way because of how powerful that idea is. And so you give something away, unfortunately, with that.
Well, Mac, to that thing, so last night I wanted to test out some theories because clearly I have nothing else to do. So I have no equipment, no nothing. And I was just going through some ranges based off some other excursions that we talked about that I was doing. And just using my own body weight, I saw some dramatic differences in quality that I never even knew existed. So, I mean, it's not ideal, but I think it's the best we got and it can be done.
I agree. Again, I agree. We just have to, understand the limitation of it, but, through sensation. And so like in your example, how did you determine low quality based on the self-assessment? What was happening in your own interpretation of your own body? Because when we're doing it, quality is interpreted by both the person who's doing the perturbation as well as the person receiving the perturbation. So when it's just half the equation, what were you experiencing that said, ooh, this doesn't feel like the quality I want?
For me, it was definitely effort, time, number of reps, but I would say the number one thing was effort, 100%.
Yeah.
So it just felt a lot harder on one side than the other. Yeah. And then also if there was pain associated as well.
So kind of back to what we talked about last time, right, which is about sensation, right? So even in my own practice, as I shared in part 2, I'm really paying a lot of attention to the client's subjective sensation reporting and what they're describing and where they're describing it and how they're describing it, because it's such an interesting and an important thing. And they're the epistemic authority of their body. They're the only ones that can report about it. No one else can. No one else can interpret somebody else's body experience but them. And so that's why fundamentally, that's such an important concept against, the quantitative aspects of counting and measuring, right? Reps per unit time, right? How much torque, right? So, yeah, that's good.
And then what I want to do now is I want to go to the gym and use actual machines with some more load and see if it corroborates to what I found with my own body weight.
There you go, right? So that's what's great about machines. Machines are a quantitative element, right? They're a fixed objective element, fixed weight, fixed displacements, and so that's a great thing to balance that again. So we're constantly, if we can, go back and forth between those things. So great, good stuff. Yeah, let us know what you find as you do that. So when we look at configurational stability, we have the QMAMC, obviously modified from the original definition that we posited in the manual muscle testing course a few years back, where we're including the practitioner's physical and cognitive abilities and their own subjective experience with the client's subjective experience, to try to understand that. And so it's assessed based on perturbation, which is based on the idea of stability given by the practitioner for some configuration, see how they respond to that, and then a judgment is made. Qualitativeness is a judgment. And so when it's low, we initiate exercise to stimulate the restoration capabilities to see if we can change biomotor output quality. And this is where the three modes come in: isos, myos, and plyos, as the three fundamental ways we change joint angle or maintain joint angle in synovial joints, on top of the derivatives of these three things in different conditions. And then we reassess control quality via the QMAMC for the configuration to see if response stability is improved, and we check with the client's unwanted somatic sensations, right? And so the video, I did a quick little video on this idea just to kind of show people that weren't familiar with the concept. There's no sound in this video, but it's just Charlie and I talking about it. And, you know, typically when you're talking to a person and what are they doing, right? They're pointing out their area of pain or what they don't like. Sometimes they're moving and telling you what bothers it the most, right? And when they feel it, when they're turning. And so this is a typical quick interview with somebody, and then we do the SARS to kind of get a check of regional stability through the perturbation sequence of the SARS to get some regional and kind of systemic or axial to appendicular reactions, and looking for, again, that can they get to equilibrium, stay there, or when deviated, you know, can they return or stay in a slightly deviated position, or unlike that left shoulder arm upper extremity thing that couldn't stay in equilibrium during the perturbation, or obtain equilibrium when perturbed for this level of torque, right? So which is relatively low based on what you could put on the system. So you just go through that sequence, and I don't need to beat this up too much. We can go a little faster, right? Go through the SARS and check that out. Go recheck that shoulder extension, right? And then checking it in different configurations now. How does the shoulder extension-y thing look in different postures, different configurations? So it kind of shows up low quality prone here, right? It shows up low quality side lying. It shows up low quality seated. Whoops. Sorry about that. Why the heck did that happen? Get this over here where we were. Prone, side lying. And then, oh, I went too far. So we checked it seated. Check seated extension-ish. Checked it that way. Oh, that's what happened. Then we check it standing. So we've checked it, this idea, we found it supine. We checked it prone. We checked it side lying. We checked it seated. We looked at it standing. So under all 5 of those different configurations, we see, you know, kind of a low quality response. And so then we initiate, you know, a simple myo, iso, plyo sequence to see what happens, right? So I'll speed through that. Then we do some isos, right? Then he does some plyos, and we recheck it, and quality's better in that configuration. What do we got to do? We go back to see whether or not it transfers to other configurations or not. At least the other 4 that we were kind of looking at. It's a little bit better there, but still not great where we found it. So we're going to keep exploring other configurations. So we'll do the side lying configuration. We do myos, isos, and plyos there. And recheck, see if the quality gets better. And then we're going to check the other configurations. We'll do the seated. And this is the most basic fundamental approach, independent of systematicity and the other variations that we can use to approach the system here. Feels much better there. We check it standing, and the quality's still relatively low. So we do a sequence of myo, iso, plyos there. And then we see the quality go up. Then we go back to the original position of how we found it. And in this case, quality is much higher. He can maintain equilibrium through the perturbation. And then we ask him how he feels, right? So, you know, that's the basic idea behind all of that. And so how can sensations an individual doesn't like pain and exercise, relate? Because of biomotor output and stability is fundamental to human survival and agency in the environment. The high level of interconnectedness, interdependency, and interactivity of the information generated by the sensory motor system assures survival. Biomotor control is an information process. The quantity of information contributes to final conclusion. System health can be assessed at the biomotor output level. And so improving biomotor output and control as a function of biomotor stability can alter biosensory processing and output. Subjective sensation and its meaning is determined by the information flowing within the system and concluded by the brain. So exercise appropriately applied and dosed. 2, where we see low quality output, improves information quality, high quality info, high quality survival conclusions, maybe sensations we don't like. And so that's really the logic and rationale for, you know, this philosophical and methodological approach to the system and creating and using exercise to see if we can change subjective sensation. So any thoughts, contributions, input on that? Anything you guys?
I got something for you. Or I actually got a question. I've noticed for probably the last year, I'd say, whenever I see you in Columbus or whatever, I've noticed you don't brace as much as you used to.
Correct.
Is that am I just making that up, or is there a rationale? And at this point, you're just looking for a system-wide response, or I'm just maybe biasing. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm if I find it, you know, that without a lot of bracing, it means the system is having trouble, you know, reacting without all that constraint or points of constraint. And so I definitely don't do a lot of bracing because I want to see the entire system approach unless I feel like, you know, I need to reduce it down for whatever reason. If that's not working, I might do it. So.
But when do you, so the thing with bracing that I have trouble with sometimes is, not trouble, but like if I have a little woman, or if, you know what I mean? Like if my just strength is so much greater than theirs, that is it a motor control issue, or is it just a like spinning on the table issue or rolling on the table issue? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, again, under whatever conditions they're under, their system has to respond. And if you're creating, you know, so much torque that their own, not just their muscle system's ability to react in the opposite direction on the other side of the seesaw to create equilibrium, but if they don't have the body mass, the inertia of their body mass isn't enough to even meet the torque that's being created by your perturbation, then yes, they might have some trouble there. So either adjust the torque or brace. But remember, as soon as you brace, you've altered the conditions. Question is, does altering the conditions and then come back when you improve it under the new braced conditions, can you go back to the unbraced or unconstrained condition and see a benefit? So,
Greg, would you consider bracing, like if we think about the homeostatic control, would you consider bracing a sort of stimulus the way perturbation would be considered a stimulus?
well, it is, yeah. So because you're touching the body and you're pushing on the body, and
you're just adding more, you're adding more stimulus to the body to respond to.
Yeah, you've changed the conditions of the configuration. Not bad or good, just changing them, right? So just recognize that. But a fat kid on one side of the seesaw, it's always going to beat a skinny kid on the other side of the seesaw. So unless you change the seesaw.
Well, I think when I think about what Dominic is saying, maybe it could be considered separate trials. So like bracing could be one trial, not bracing could be a trial two.
Correct.
And then based on the person's response, you can figure out, if the person can even handle. So less is more, I guess, is what I'm coming to grips with.
Typically, yeah, that's how I would think about it. And again,
sometimes what I'll do is I'll check both sides, obviously, and then if they could do it on one side, then clearly I know it's not, a mass issue, or it's just, you just can't figure it out on that particular side. So that helps a lot too when I do that.
Yeah, so there's that value again from the bilateral symmetry construct, that there is some, an inherent standard there. Again, not always perfect, clearly, but it's another reference, for us to kind of check in with. So agreed. Yeah.
I've also kind of found there's like a level of like self-calibration that needs to happen like prior to working with a client, just because if you're seeing multiple clients a day and they're all various sizes and ability, Greg or anyone else, do you guys find that kind of need for self-calibration, meaning like you have to kind of check in with yourself and not bring any biases like, oh, this person's big, so therefore I'm going to have to really generate force, or this person's so tiny, I better just barely press them down. I feel like I have to really attend to any of those sort of assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, my tendency is to always start with the least amount of torque I think I can generate for the configurations that we have set up. And then if they, meet that torque perturbation, that perturbing force, and I'm looking at their history and injuries and exercise and their body size and their, all the other variables we have to consider, then I do start to increase torque.
Yeah, Greg, I'm a tiny gal, as most of y'all know. So I'm constantly having to think about that sort of thing and how to create torque on different bodies without, impacting my systems as intensely. Do you have anything to say to that, or can anyone else share?
Ankle weights.
Yeah, I do use those.
Yep. So you may have to, add
that with
that
with the QMAMC stuff.
Yeah. So you might have to say, look, I'm going to put this 5-pound weight around your leg, and then I'm going to push on you. So you have to do both, right?
That's why I love phase 2, Mel. All comes back to phase 2, remember.
Yeah, I do. I use phase 2 quite a bit, Dom.
Yeah, I mean, this is the benefit of machines, right? And these other apparati to help you. I mean, you're speaking to one of the limitations of the QMAMC, right? Well,
yeah, and I think what like I got a 280 Oakland Raiders guy, and I'm constantly having to think about how to move his body and such, and you know, different stuff. So I'm just trying to think about how else, if I don't have a machine available, or if I'm doing an assessment, how I can gather the most information I can without impacting my body.
Yeah. Ankle weights, tubing could do it, for sure. But leaning into it. But there's an upper limit for you, Mel, right? So upper limit for me, everybody's got an upper limit for how much torque they can produce, how hard they can push. Good. Any other ideas or thoughts on this subject of exercise pain, subjective sensation, stability, quality, control, configurations, right? Different configurations? I find that to be powerful, right? 90-90 hip, external rotation, supine, seated, extended, leg over the table, prone, leaning up against the total gym, right? You see different outputs for the same kinematic action or similar kinematic actions. It's fascinating. Good. Anything else you guys want to jump in on? If not, that is the end of the review.
Greg, I got one quick question.
Yeah.
What is the scientific rationale having high quality in 4 different configurations and then that 5th one, and there just being such an absence of quality in that? What is that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
It could be again be that a co-contraction situation, right? Where now they're trying to do it, the kinematic action, but they have to do it while they're isometrically maintaining the hip flexion part, the hip flex. Mm-hmm. For the brain, that's a totally different situation to try to figure out motor control for. Assessing seated hip flexed with the knee flexed at 90 and with the isometric at the knee extensor simultaneously, right? Suddenly they can't hold the hip flexion.
Controlling and anchoring the other segments of that configuration is the logical rationale thinking.
Yeah, we just come back to the straight mechanics, the straight physics of that, for sure, and that's why that's such an important. We can never escape those things, and why we have, great footing, on the physics mechanics side. It's hard to argue with that.
Mm-hmm.
For us, because that's what the brain is for, right? The brain is for trying to solve the physics problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And I had a little chart I was looking at to try to describe that. I can't remember what I did with it. What did I do with that? I have too many documents. Applied Engineering Principles Manual. Very good manual. Oh, okay. Yeah, so this was sort of an attempt at trying to look at how the sensation control biomaterials model kind of worked, right? Where, no matter where you kind of start, if you were starting with the sensation side from the subject's, perspective and their verbal report and their psychological perceptions of that, let alone the, you know, the mechanical aspects of what they're saying or describing, leads to the physics statics analysis. You know, from the practitioner side, through their interpretation of the QMAMC and the response expectation that comes with that. And then the compare contrast to the opposite side, like Dom was just talking about it, depending on whether you're in phase 1 or phase 2. You know, it still leads to a physics statics analysis. And on the material side, looking at history and injury and surgery and known disease and how they use their system historically, how active they are, how sedentary they are, mechanical aspects of the injury, surgery, and current known disease, the neurological impact of that, and that leads to a mechanical statics analysis. From the control perspective, what's the current observation? What's the response expectation on both the subject and practitioner side? How are they locating? What are they verbally reporting? The practitioners doing some kind of compare contrast to whatever they previously attempted. And then there's a mechanical location identifying process, which leads to a physics statics analysis, right? So ultimately, you know, we're breaking things down to, you know, what's the physics statics thing here? And how do we interpret that? This is free body diagram drawing in your head. And we probably need a course on that. So. Any questions about that?
I got a question, Mac.
Yeah.
Can I use, I have been doing it. I'm curious if I'm accurate. I think I am, but who knows? Co-contraction as a way to create my own active plyo.
Yeah.
If I have nothing else.
It's about all you can do, right? Yes.
Okay.
Let the antagonist become, you know, the agonist, right? Through the controlled co-contraction.
Yeah, I'm trying to go 100% virtual, so I'm trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, it's a very strange.
It's like I'd be on a beach somewhere.
Very strange thing. Yeah, probably not going to happen, but you can try.
Beaches are closed, Dom. Come on, didn't you listen to us earlier?
No beaches for you.
Hey, Greg, can I ask about how you're considering inflammatory processes within joints, to, how that influences the physics of the joint itself?
Of course, yeah. So, you know, if we're looking at this one, right, current known disease on the neurological side, which is where the, you know, where we're talking about the immune response and its effect on the neurology. What do we know about, you know, inflammatory process, the paracrine and autocrine responses, you know, to whatever tissues are experiencing an inflammatory response and their release of cytokines, right? And, you know, interleukin factors and all these crazy chemical molecules that start spilling out of these cells into the surrounding environment and affect other cells, let alone turn on an effect in the cell that secreted it. But that chemical information, you know, makes its way into the neurological system. And we know through arthrokinematic reflex inhibition, right? When joints are inflamed, joint materials are inflamed, the sensory neurons pick up on this and then impinge upon the motor neurons for the muscles that are controlling that joint. And we talked about a couple of the known neurological laws that show these relationships in the spinal cord, in the ventral and dorsal horns, between the tissues that control joints and the joint materials themselves. And they're all very closely in the same proximity to each other and connected to each other through internuncial or interneurons. And that inflammatory process in joints can create a quality change in motor output. There's just no This is a well-documented fact. So how much? We don't know. But could that affect what's happening? Yes. Yes. If that answers your question, Mel.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it does, and I'm also thinking about how the brain is also sending those chemical messengers, right, to the different parts. So not just responsible for the physics dynamic, but also the chemical dynamic and how those interrelate.
Yeah, it's a soup of interactivity, right? That's what makes this so complicated and difficult, and why we shouldn't be surprised that some parts of the system are stubborn or non-responsive, or may never be responsive until that part gets dealt with. You know, some joints, they degrade so much that there's just nothing we're going to do about that until the bone is removed that's inflamed, and that inflammatory process is removed, essentially. So yeah, very difficult. Like hip joints, when hip joints, you know, go south in terms of the cartilage being worn off, and I've had no success long term trying to help someone manage that. Knees, you know, we can extend the life of that. Shoulders, pretty good. Hips, I just have no success with that. There's something about the hip joint, and that dude's bone on bone. You're just done. Hard to manage. Hard to manage.
If they have a hip replacement, are you finding
Yep, gets
different
better.
results, right? Yeah, okay, that's what I've noticed as
Gets
well.
better real fast, right?
Like
So
really, really fast.
yeah, so you're just like, oh, okay, you know, the joint was smoked. So yeah, so those are things that can often help a client really make a decision. You know, there are, you know, many folks who are trying to avoid surgeries. Understood. There is research saying there's just too many of these surgeries, and you know, to cut or not to cut, wow, it's a big decision. It's not our decision to make for them. They have to make the decision with their doctor about to cut or not to cut. And, you know, it's really up to the client. I mean, I have clients who are like, I don't want surgery until, you know, it's absolutely necessary. And they're the ones that have to decide that. Or they're waiting out stem cell research, or, you know, regrowing cartilage or whatever it is. And there are some folks who they don't care. They'll have the surgery as soon as possible. You know, they just want to know whether or not a conservative approach will help, and if it really doesn't, they're going to get the surgery. So, you know, we can show them, look, this conservative approach probably not helping you very much. So you may want to talk to the doctor and decide to get that surgery sooner than later. But they can't lose, because if they work with us up to the point of the surgery, you know, we're going to have their system at least the highest quality that it probably could be in the face of those circumstances. So, you know, we certainly are going to knock on wood that it helps their outcome, because, you know, we've got their tissues and their control as high as possible going in. So nothing wrong with that, unless they just don't want to do it. So a lot of decisions to be made here. But good, real good. Anything else on this subject? I don't know if you guys want this or not. I can send it to you if you want.
Yes, please.
That'd be great.
Oh, some candy.
Yeah, I'd like a copy if you don't mind.
All right. Well, it's rough, you know. I just can't stab at this, and probably needs to be developed a little bit more, but I'm happy to send it to everybody who's on the call, at least. All right. Any other final thoughts? You got anything, Hope? Anything you'd like to add to the discourse? Final dispensations? I guess not. Still with us, Hope? She left. Curtis, you got anything?
Hello, I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah. I actually had a question about just quickly when we were talking about the different configurations of ranges of motion that we look at. Like, for example, the hip rotation, when you see a pretty big deficit seated versus all the other configurations.
Yeah.
I just had a question because I think about it like, okay, what's different? There's trunk involved. And so I may go and kind of veer away from the hip and look at the trunk. Would you go right into, I'm just going to look at trunk and hip together, like look at the rotation when your trunk flexed? Or would you just go and let's just look at some trunk stuff?
Well, I tend to look at the configuration itself, right? So
Right.
I'll just say, all right, let's just do the myoisos plyo sequence here from this configuration where I'm seeing the low quality.
Yeah.
And if I don't really see a big improvement, then I'm doing what you're saying.
Got it.
Like, okay, now you're sitting upright. You have to stabilize your trunk, right? You've got to do all this
Right.
that you don't have to do supine and prone.
Sure.
Let me see. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you're doing the kind of the free body diagram in your head thing.
Yes.
Which is what you got to do. Yeah, but if I can do it simply with the myoiso plyo, I'm happy about that. Right.
Right.
Like, all right, that helped us. We're good.
Yeah.
It's when it fails that you're like, okay, I got to think this through a little bit more. And then you start looking around at the axial relationship or intermediate joints, right?
Yeah, it's good because I have a tendency to overthink things. So I'm thinking like, okay, there's some motor control issues seated, so I'm going to go to the trunk and then I'm going to look at the hip and blah, blah, blah. And I just need to like focus in and be like, just work what's in front of me right now.
Yeah, just do that. Yeah, there's no reason to get too crazy, or at least right away, right? Because it might be simpler.
Yeah.
Might be simpler than you thought. It could just be the brain's like going,
sure.
well, I haven't had to do this before.
Yeah, the rabbit hole is always beckoning, so I gotta stay in the moment.
Yeah.
We also want to be mindful of allostatic load, right? Because
Sure.
depending on that person, if working in their trunk is going to be too much for their nervous system, you might want to pull back.
For sure, yeah. It's all dependent on like their history and what there's always it's always hard to kind of pinpoint one thing and talk about it without knowing a lot of surrounding things. But
Yeah, so we need to see the profile, right?
Sure.
But yeah, so we get back to the materials control sensation thing. What do they feel when they report it? Like you do the seated thing and you go to do the QMAMC and like, ooh, my low back hurts when you do that, right? Oh,
sure.
Or no, my medial knee hurt when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. It's always like a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, that's why every situation is so unique, right? It's unique to them. This is what makes it so challenging. It's not, to turn these things into protocol-based processes is, man, that's tricky business, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's not.
Could I ask how you handle neurological overload in a session if it happens?
Well, yeah, depending on what that means, right? It just means that whatever I'm doing, I'm seeing a general loss in quality of motor output. Is that what you mean by neurologic overload?
Yeah, like considering someone's allostatic load and you're working with them and let's say they, whatever's happening there, I haven't had this happen, but it's something that I think about just as far as like dose response. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, I'm always trying to figure out the minimum effective dose, which we don't know, unfortunately, except again, based on their own sensation reporting, how they feel in their body and whether quality of output by the way we assess that is being maintained or improving, right? And so if I think, if I'm working with someone, I'm thinking, geez, they have a high allostatic load, bunch of surgeries, injuries, I might check a little more frequently with the SARS or some of the SARS to see if I'm losing some stuff. And, whether it's central fatigue or peripheral fatigue, is what you've got to try to decide. It depends on what I just did to them. So if I had somebody, hold something for 90 seconds on the right side and then 90 seconds on the other side, and quality's dropping on both sides and some SARS, I might think, whew, that fatigued them. And so I'm just going to let them rest for, 3 or 4 minutes, and I'll just check the QMC, AC, or SARS periodically to see if they're starting to recover and how long that takes. But if I just bend a joint, I bend a joint and they bend their joint to its end range, and that joint, it's had 3 surgeries on it and the cartilage is missing and there's no ligament in there and all that stuff, and I'd recheck SARS and quality and it's all went south, then I'm thinking about that reflexive joint inhibitory process. And then I have to initiate something to see if I can get the quality back up as much as possible, because you can't always predict when that's going to happen. So, if that answers your question, no.
Yeah, I think I just also like to hear how other people are thinking about that. Just considering like every body's different, and again, just trying not to make any assumptions that based on how they look and even how they report. Sometimes their report may not be accurate with what they're showing.
Yeah, that's why you want a couple of pieces of information, right? For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else got anything on Mel's question, or how they're dealing with that? Less is more initially.
Yeah, I try to just be really, really easy with it. But if I ever push past that, I try to let him rest for a bit, see if he can start to come back. But I don't know if I've had anybody, and I could be completely off, but really push past that threshold to where we're done. Might be done in an area or kind of call it good, let it rest. But usually when I let him rest, it kind of comes back. That configuration or other configurations that I picked start to come back once they rest and recover. But yeah, I think your point about allostatic load, Mel, crucial. I mean, I think that's been a huge, thermometer for myself to make sure I'm being held. Okay, Curtis, they look like they're doing pretty good. Let's not go too fast. Let's be easy with it. So I think the allostatic load really helps. But I can't say that I've had somebody really get what you said, push past that off the top of my head, if that makes sense.
Good. Anything else? Tim, Mike, Lee, you guys good?
Yeah, I just think the process in which we do things really minimizes the risk up front with all the information and data collection. So we really, minimize the chances of that happening.
You don't want to attack a vulnerable area, right? For sure.
Yeah, and pretty much we know, or at least with all the data we collect, we'll know pretty much where the vulnerable areas are going to be, and seeing them actively move and do these things. Really, if we're paying attention, we're going to know where not to begin, or really get a better indication of what their their status for the day is.
Absolutely. Good. Anything else, Lee?
No, I'm all good. Just listening in.
Lee's good. Got anything, Mike? Our first responder, you're good. All right.
Sorry, other people talking to me at the same time, but I'm listening.
Good. All right, you guys, well done. We are finished with that little review. So I'll get this out, and we'll keep producing content, keep talking to each other. All right, enjoy the rest of the day.
Greg, do we
Thanks,
have a
Greg.
class tomorrow?
Well,
Thanks, Greg.